Hey guys, it's Generalkidd here. How's everyone doing today? So, for today's video, we are going to once again be tackling the mystery of the secret second skull on Cortana in Halo 3. As it turns out, everything we all thought we knew about the skull was totally wrong, and after this video, all the Halopedia articles and other stuff about this out there are going to have to be rewritten. So, I and many others have covered this skull in the past, and for the past 15 years, everyone has more or less assumed the same wrong thing about this skull. So for this video, we're going to be tackling this mystery one last time and finally solving it once and for all. So let's start off with a refresher on the secret skull. On the Halo 3 mission Cortana, normally for achievements and unlocks, you only need to get the one tilt skull, and that's the only official skull on this map. However, a long time ago, people discovered there's actually a second skull hidden on this map in the engine core room. This skull could be picked up, but it didn't unlock any skulls, armors, or achievements. It really seemed to do nothing, and for a while it was neglected by 343 and was actually unobtainable on MCC due to it spawning in midair and rolling off the map. However, that has actually since been fixed, and like with the original Halo 3, carrying this skull into the next mission would cause you to spawn with a laser. Naturally, everyone assumed this was a feature of the skull and the true Easter egg behind it. There were of course other theories, like the skull would somehow unlock recon armor, or it was a second blind skull or cut assassin skull. But the widely accepted consensus was that this skull simply gives you a Spartan Laser on the next mission. Well, some of those theories and assumptions do have a small element of truth to them, but overall none of them fully explain everything accurately. But I do want to clarify one more time that this bug with the skull falling off the map has been fixed on MCC sometime in the past year, I assume. I don't know exactly when, but it's finally been fixed. So if you want to grab that skull yourself on MCC, feel free to do so. So what is this skull then, if it's not really any of those theories? Well, the truth is, the skull's ability to give you a Spartan Laser on the next mission is actually completely false. Or at the very least, the Spartan Laser being an effect of the skull itself is false. The truth is, that is all just one big glitch or bug in the game's code. Now personally, I do actually find it very fascinating why the bug even happens in the first place, and I do want to give a big shout out to Crevel and Camden for helping dig through the code of the game and help me figure out what's going on. We literally spent days doing multiple experiments on Halo 3, reading and interpreting code, and researching how Halo 3 handles transferring weapons between missions. So, before we get into the nitty-gritty technical details, let's go over some of the more basic facts about the skull first. For starters, it's true the skull was meant to be a blind skull. It's known as a secondary skull in the game files, which is what Halo 3 used for the silver skulls, or non-scoring skulls, like the actual blind skull. However, in the game files and the spawn data, this skull is actually named as a blind skull. That being said, and I've proved this in the previous video before, despite being named a blind skull, it really doesn't do anything when you pick it up. In the mission scripts, there's always code to handle what happens when you pick up a valid skull. But on the mission Cortana, there is nothing that handles this second blind skull. The script makes absolutely no reference to it at all. So this skull is literally just there and has no actual functions assigned to it. It's just a plain old skull that does nothing. Okay, so now that we have all the basic info out of the way, time to dive into Halo 3's Blam engine and see what's going on that causes this bug to happen and swap your skull for a Spartan Laser. So first of all, it's important to clarify that a Spartan Laser itself actually has nothing to do with this really. Under the right conditions and map setups, this glitch can potentially spawn you with almost any energy weapon in place of the skull you are holding. What's going on under the hood is that when you carry the skull from Cortana to Halo, the game processes the weapons in your inventory, and it checks to make sure all the weapons are valid and exist on the next mission. It will then try to give you the exact same weapons, or if it can't, give you the default loadout of the missions. However, how that works is that every mission has a list of available mission weapons called a weapon palette. It seems the Halo 3 Blam engine doesn't actually have the ability to just copy your exact weapon over between missions. So instead, it searches through each section of this weapon palette, or each index, until it finds the weapon that most closely matches the properties of the weapon from the previous mission. If the match is close enough, then it will give it to you at the spawn of the next mission with the same ammo count if possible. That if possible part is actually one of the main things that causes this bug. Now you may be thinking that the skull is nothing like a Spartan Laser, so why does the game think it's close enough? Well, let's take a look at this diagram and follow the skull's journey as the game checks what it is. So once the game sees the skull and compares it against everything in the weapon palette starting from the first index, or index 0, this sample palette here is the first 3 weapons in the weapon palette on the mission Halo. So the first weapon to compare to is a Spartan Laser, an energy weapon. So now the game will check the skull and see if it's close enough to the Spartan Laser. First, the game will check if the skull has a barrel on it. If it has a barrel, it will continue checking if the barrel itself and the weapon projectiles are a match to the Spartan Laser. However, the skull does not actually have a barrel, so it fails this test, and the game jumps to the next test to see if the skull is a specific type of melee weapon. In fact, it checks this by checking for the type of melee damage that the skull has, and this particular type of melee damage that it has is actually just called melee, which ironically all non-melee weapons share this type of melee damage, including weapons like the BR, shotgun, and Spartan Laser. So the skull just happens to be set to the same melee damage type as normal non-melee weapons, so it actually passes this check for this kind of melee weapon. And by passing this check, the game actually thinks the skull is a valid match to the weapon it's been trying to compare to, which in this case, it was comparing it to the Spartan Laser, and therefore the game places the Spartan Laser in your inventory for spawn. Now, if certain or all tests failed for comparing the weapon, the game will move on to the next section of the weapon palette until it finds something, or if it can't, just give you the default loadout. Also, while going through each index of the weapon palette, if it encounters any projectile weapon, it will cause the search to fail and just give you the default loadout as well, which I'll explain why later too. So there you have it. That's why you spawn with a Spartan Laser on Halo. Simply because the skull has a certain type of melee damage that confuses the game and makes it stop the comparison prematurely, thus making it a valid match to the skull. But the Spartan Laser has nothing to do with it. Really could have easily been any weapon, provided it's an energy weapon, like the Sentinel Beam, which I'll explain real soon. Now, why does it only change into some weapons, but not all? Well, after the game determines that a weapon is valid, before giving it to you, it will do one last task of transferring the ammo, or in the case of energy weapons, the battery, over to the new weapon. However, for projectile weapons, the game won't let you carry over an empty weapon, so if the magazine is empty, it'll give you the default loadout instead. But energy weapons don't have magazines, so the game skips this particular check and moves on directly to transferring the battery charge instead, which is why it's possible to bring over an energy weapon with 0 energy, because the game doesn't mind 0 energy weapons. But the skull probably has a default charge of 100, which is why the Spartan Laser or any energy weapon it turns into has 100 charge for its battery. This is why the skull fails to turn into anything if it encounters a projectile weapon in the palette, because then it'll go through that magazine check, which it'll fail and make it invalid, thus giving you the default loadout of that mission. So basically, the skull turning into a Spartan Laser is quite a fluke and only happens when the stars align perfectly. The simplest explanation, to sum this up, is that for this to happen, these 3 requirements must be met. The previous mission must have a skull. The next mission must have an energy weapon within the very first index of its weapon palette, and the next mission itself must support carrying weapons over from the previous mission too. Anything that doesn't meet these requirements will cause you to spawn with a default weapon loadout on the next mission. With all that in mind, it might have crossed your mind now that there are other skulls on other missions in this game that could potentially transfer over to the next mission. Well, as a matter of fact, you are right. Cortana is not the only mission this happens on. In fact, the secret skull isn't even the only skull on this mission that can do this. If you bring the main tilt skull with you, it too will turn into a Spartan Laser on the next mission. It's not just exclusive to that secret skull, the second skull that does nothing. But Cortana isn't the only mission that has this ability, I guess. On the mission Savo Highway, if you also carry over a skull to the next mission, and there's one skull on this mission, it will turn into a plasma pistol for the same reasons as the Spartan Laser. So if you carry over the skull into the Storm on the next mission, you will spawn with the plasma pistol. And within the first index of the weapon palette on the mission, the Storm is in fact the plasma pistol, which passes all the checks needed to turn the skull into it, just like the Spartan Laser. There are, of course, other missions where weapons carry over, but those other missions don't meet all the necessary criteria or pass the right checks. I did this test on Halo 2 a little as well, but it seems Halo 2 handles the skull correctly and just starts you off with the default loadout if you bring a skull between missions, even if the next mission has a properly set up weapon palette. So after Halo 3, no other game has skulls in the game until Halo Infinite, and Halo Infinite does carry over weapons between every single mission so far just fine. It doesn't seem like there's any trouble there. The code's probably been updated a lot since then. However, if Halo 3 ODST did have skulls in game, then perhaps I would imagine this glitch might still happen in that game, and possibly some other games too. But right now it's mainly just Halo 3, and only on the mission Savo Highway and Cortana. Alrighty, so that about wraps it up for this video. In the end, the secret skull on Cortana turned out to be nothing, really. It is basically just a cut, unused blind skull that was left over in the game. It doesn't actually have any special properties, nor is it responsible for giving you a Spartan Laser on the next level. Nor is it the only skull in the game that can give you a different weapon on the next mission. All of that happens because of a bug in the game's engine, with how it handles transferring weapons between missions. And now you've seen exactly why that happens. It's definitely very interesting why the bug happens in the first place, and it's easy to see why it's obscure enough to have gone under Bungie's radar during development of Halo 3. Perhaps they did notice the bug eventually from all the videos people posted and all the articles about the second skull on Cortana. And, maybe they eventually made sure it's been fixed in later Halo games. But as for Halo 3, this is a bug that's been around for at least 15 years now, and it still exists even on the latest version of Halo 3 on the Master Chief Collection. So after 15 years, after all this time, we all now have proof and confirmation that what a lot of us believed was a special effect of the skull is really just a glitch in the game. But at least the mystery has finally been solved and put to rest once and for all. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video and found it to be interesting. As always, if you did, make sure to leave a like. If there's anything else to look into or check out, or any other mysteries you want me to investigate, just let me know in the comments down below, and I'll definitely do my best to link to it when I get the chance. But aside from that, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you all next time. Bye guys!